Amen. We are in the book of Genesis. We're at chapter 36. We'll continue our study. And let me see if I can put this guy in a good place. There we go. Last time we saw Jacob make his way to Hebron. He arrived in Hebron a short time before his father Isaac died. And of course, Hebron is in the southern region of Israel. It's kind of down around here. He gets there just before Isaac dies. They bury him. And then in chapter 36, which we're looking at today, the narrative shifts focus to Esau and his descendants. Now, as we've talked about before, the Genesis is really the story of the genealogy of the Messiah. In fact, the Old Testament is teaching us the genealogy of the Messiah. And Esau is not part of that genealogy. So we're going to look at all of his kids and his wives and stuff. It doesn't really matter because they disappear from the narrative. So if it's okay with you, I'm not going to read all the begots and spend a lot of time with that. You can read that for extra credit homework. I'll grade you on it later. But we will focus on a few items in chapter 36. So let's pick it up in verse 1. Now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Edom was considered a nation, and it's made up of the descendants of Esau. Edom means red. So because Esau was born all red, or red all over it says, that's what they called the country, Edom. There we go. So Edom is the one in the yellow down here. Kingdom of Edom. Now when he first settles, he's kind of in this region. And then as time goes on, the nation expanded. Until at the very end, it even took in some of Judah's territory. Until finally King Nebuchadnezzar comes and wipes them out. In the 500s, 500 BC. Now there's two famous places attached with Edom. One is Mount Seir. That's not it. There we go. So Mount Seir, and the other one, can you guess what the other one is? Yeah, Petra. So Mount Seir is a mountain up here, and there was a city there. And then Petra is right here, which is on the schedule for our Israel trip. If some people want to go to Jordan, they'll go to Petra. And in Petra, let's take a look at Petra. There we go. There's the treasury. Anybody seen Indiana Jones? And I forget which one it was. Oh, In Search of the Sepulchre, the cup that Jesus drank out of. So this is the treasury in Petra. And you can see on the left there is the canyon that you walk through to get there. It's really pretty dramatic. It's quite an impressive location. Here's a theater that's still there in Petra. This is a Google Earth shot, and can you see where I have the treasury marked out there? Right here? So you'd walk down this canyon and you come out and there's the treasury that I showed you the slide of. Here's the theater down here. So the town, the city, all of these hillsides are full of dwelling places. You keep on going down the canyon. Here's what I just showed you earlier. You keep going down the canyon, and there's lots of ruins in this area. So it became a large city, the city of Edom. Now, they maintained a constant hostility with the nation Israel. And when the Israelites came back from Egypt, they wanted to go up the King's Highway. It was a route, a well-known route during the time. This is a picture of the King's Highway route. All right, look at it, goes right by Petra. And the Edomites said, no way, Jose. There's too many of you. You're going to take over our country, take over our riches, so we're not letting you through. We'll fight with you if you try to come through our territory. So Israel had to divert and go way to the east and walk up and then come back as they're trying to enter the promised land. And God wasn't thrilled about that. When Babylon took Jerusalem in the 590s, the Edomites thought, cool, we've hated Israel all these years. We'll go take their territory now. That's great. But God prophesied in Isaiah 34 that Edom would fall and that her cities would be for the owl, raven, jackals, wild goat, and the arrow snake. I have no idea what an arrow snake is, but it sounds cool. So Edom was wiped out and overrun by Arabs in 550 BC, and it took from 550 to about 400 BC to completely wipe them out. Verse 2, Esau took wives from the daughters of Canaan. Now, the descendants of Canaan were cursed. Do you remember when that happened? Noah, when he's blessing his sons, he said, Ham, your son Canaan, his descendants, it's not going to go well for them. And so here's Esau marrying the daughters of Canaan, so he's becoming Esau's descendants. It's not going to go well for them. Whereas Isaac and Jacob took daughters that were not Canaanite. Took wives that were not Canaanite. So this is kind of a main theme for Esau. He took daughters from Canaan, and then picking it up here, the rest of verse 2, he lists them, Ada, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, and these names that I can't say. So let's skip them, go down to verse 6. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle and all his animals, and all his goods, which he had gained in the land of Canaan, and he went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. And the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. We know where that is now, right? Esau is Edom. So even though Jacob received the blessing and the birthright, hey, Esau is still being blessed. He's got a lot of wealth. Two families are so large they needed to dwell apart. Verse 9, and this is the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. These were the names of Esau's sons, and he lists them there. The one we want to look at is Eliphaz. Let's see. The sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenaz. One of the comforters of Job was named Eliphaz the Temanite. Isn't that interesting? Could it be that this Eliphaz was the very same person that was comforting Job? Now you remember some of their advice was pretty crummy, but these men would come and try to comfort Job. And Job is considered the oldest book in the Bible. So if this guy is the guy in Job, then this would date the book of Job to about the 17th century BC. Just kind of an interesting thought. Down to verse 12. Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore Amalek. These are probably where the Amalekites came from, notable enemies of Israel, mentioned in Exodus 17, Deuteronomy 25, and 1 Samuel 15. Then moving on to verse 15, in verses 15 through 9, we see the chiefs of Edom named. Again, not that interesting to us because they quickly disappear from the narrative. Down in verse 20 through 30, we see the sons of Seir named and their chiefs, including the Horites, which were people that were eventually destroyed. Now in verse 31, we begin to look at the kings of Edom. And in verse 33, we see a ruler named Jobab. Some people believe this was actually Job. Job was also a ruler, it says, in his time. We don't have any real proof that this guy is that guy, but it certainly could be. Chapter 37. That was about the fastest chapter we've ever done, wasn't it? If you want, I'll go back and read all the names. I can't pronounce them, but I'll give it my best shot. Okay, chapter 37, verse 1. This is going to be way more fun. We're going to look at Jacob and Joshua. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. In other words, he's in the promised land. This is the history of Jacob. We've got Isaac dwelling in Hebron, we've got Jacob dwelling in Hebron, Isaac's dead, and we've got Esau to the east and south dwelling in Edom. And we're going to look a lot today at Joseph. In fact, he's in the remainder of the book. We kind of focus on Joseph. He's a very important character. One of the things that we notice about Joseph is he's really honorable. Regardless of the situation, he never seems to compromise his walk, and he stays true to God. Anybody want that characteristic in your life? Man, I do. We never see him wrestling with God like we saw Jacob wrestling with God. Jacob says, I want to control things. I'm going to have this plan. And he's wrestling all night with God, and finally God has to disable him to get him to submit to the Lord. I suggest that Joseph made the choice beforehand that no matter what comes his way, he would choose God. If temptation arises, I'm going to choose God. If hardship arises, I'll choose God. If a difficult trial comes, what? I'll choose God. It's a great idea to purpose in your heart ahead of time, so when we're faced with the choice, as a surprise, we've already made the decision. Now, in our school, Table Rock Christian School, we try to teach habit training. If you have the habit of, I don't lie, I tell the truth, then all of a sudden something comes up and surprises you, what do? You're going to follow your habit. Or the habit of treating people kindly. Habit of turning your eyes away from that racy picture or gal or whatever. You're in the habit of it. You'll do it. I was trying to find an illustration for that. And as you know, I'm a pilot. And when I learned to fly a twin-engine airplane, one of the items in the pre-takeoff checklist was when you take off and you lift up and you're about 100 feet and one engine quits, what are you going to do? Because some airplanes will continue flying and climb great. And some airplanes will not continue flying. They'll start descending. And so you have to decide, will I keep going and fly, or will I pick a spot and land? And how heavy am I? What's the dynamics of the current situation, the altitude? Are there mountains in front of me? So before you take off, you make that decision. Why? Because if you don't make the decision and you take off and you're 100 feet, how long do you have to think about it? You panic, and you'll probably make the wrong decision. So you purpose ahead of time. When the situation arises, I've already made the decision, and I believe that Joseph did this. Now, with regard to the decisions that come, we can make pre-decisions spiritually. James 1:14-15 reads, each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Do I have a yeah? That's how it works? Yeah, we think of something, the desires, and we think about it more, and then we start allowing ourselves to be enticed. And then when the desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth what? Death. It's a pattern that we see again and again. But Joseph, I suggest, purposed in his heart that he's not going to allow those desires to entice him. He purposed in his heart to choose God instead. And as we'll read later, when the boss's wife tried to take her into his bedroom, what did he do? He fled. He didn't have to think about it. I've already made the decision. He fled, even had to leave his jacket as she's hanging on to it. I'm out of here. He didn't have to stop and think. Now, the good news is there's a promise of a blessing when we choose God over that temptation that we're faced with. James 1:12. Blessed, which we can interpret as, oh, how happy. Blessed is the man who endures temptation. Oh, joy. I'd really rather not endure it. But when we have to endure it, oh, how happy is the man when you successfully endure it. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. God says in John 10:10, I have come that you may have life and that you may have it more abundantly. That's for right now. That's not later. That's now. Abundant life now. It's the consequence of following God. So, though Joseph struggled with sin just like we do, he's an impressive example for us to follow. Joseph trusted God. He purposed in his heart to follow God no matter what happened. And he did it at 17. I remember when I was 17, that wasn't a great description of me. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Joseph was Rachel's firstborn. Rachel was the favorite wife. Joseph was the 11th son, and he became a favorite. And apparently Joseph is supervising or reporting on how work's going. And we have, the sons are limited here. You notice these are the surrogate sons, the sons of the surrogates. And which way is the correct way to say it? I don't know. But these are not like of the wives, these are of the maids that produce sons. So were they a lower status? I don't know. But we have that group together only. And the youngest buck comes and says, Dad, they're goofing off. I've been out there watching them. They're goofing off. But he was in a tough spot, wasn't he, being the youngest guy? But for some reason, Dad said, I want you to report on them. He knew he'd get an honest report from Joseph. He's probably doing his job well, but it didn't earn him any favors with his brothers. Verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. Not a great thing to do, Dad. But he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. So we continue with this dysfunctional family. Having a favorite's not right, but we're not really surprised by these guys, are we? We've seen so many other things they do wrong. This tunic of many colors, most tunics would be sleeveless and come down, below the belt so you could work. Your arms are free and you could work. This one was different. This one would have had arms down to the wrists and it would have come down to your ankles. This is not a tunic that a worker would wear. This is a tunic that a privileged person of status would wear. So you're out there, you're cutting the wheat, you're working hard, you're sweating, it's a hot day, and here comes your little brother, and he's wearing this tunic. Well, how's it going, guys? Oh, you're goofing off again, aren't you? I mean, how would you feel? I can see why these guys would not be thrilled to have Joseph come out. And so it says they hated him so much they couldn't even speak peaceably to him. Man, there's differing degrees of hate. But a hate that comes to this level is really sad. And it also reveals a heart that's probably not walking with God. Because if we're walking with God, we're going to have God's heart. And they wouldn't have this hate coming out of their pores. Can you imagine the difficulties Joseph must have endured with his 10 older brothers? And who's he go hang out with? Maybe a sister or something, I guess. He was really probably kind of alone. So let's amp it up. That's just not enough to have to deal with. Verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers. Maybe that was a bad idea. And they hated him even more. Of course, this is a prophetic dream. God was blessing the whole family by showing them a prophetic dream. If we're living life abundantly and walking with the Lord, and we hear a prophecy, even if we don't understand it, my heart, I'm thinking, would go, wow, it's great. It's going to be fun to see what God does, because I trust God. So now the narrative is going to tell us the dream in verse 6. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. They're cutting the wheat. A sheaf, you get your wheat together, and then you'd tie it up, and you'd have the heads on top, and you'd maybe set them in stands like that, and then you go on and you start cutting some more. So we're there binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. What's the interpretation? You guys are going to bow down to me sometime in the future. I mean, the brothers already resented Joseph. There's already a strained relationship. There's no way they're going to receive this well. Now, significant to the dream is that it involves sheaves of wheat. And later, when his brothers come to him in Egypt, why are they down there? We're out of food, and you're selling wheat. Verse 8, and his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers, oh joy, and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. Now the sun and the moon would represent mom and dad. The 11 stars represented his 11 brothers. So we have the same prophetic dream in more detail. It's going to include mom and dad and all the sons. You're all going to bow down to me. Verse 10, so he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. I don't know how many of you can control your dreams. I have a hard time doing it. And if this is a prophetic dream, God gave it to him. Why is he being grinded? I don't know, but the family rebukes him for sharing the dream. Now, it could be that Joseph wasn't supposed to share it, but he chose to. Man, you guys are picking on me all the time, and look at this word God has given me, and, out of pride, out of defense, he might have shared it. Or it could be that he was right on in sharing it, but the family's just full of pride. These are guesses. We don't know. The narrative shows that he shared it, and we see the reaction. But we do know that his dream was fulfilled when the family went down to Egypt. The whole family was saved by Joseph because he was in a position to give them food. You could say that Joseph was a type for the Messiah in that he was there able to save God's people. We see the symbolism of Joseph's dream a second time in the book of Revelation. And I'm in chapter 12. If you want to turn there, it's a few verses, or you can stay where you are. I'll read it to you. Revelation 12, 1 through 6. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars, not 11, but 12 stars. This woman was clothed with Israel. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. The child is the Messiah. The Messiah comes from Israel. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. Who do you think that is? Any guesses? Wasn't Mary, mother, any guesses? Dragon? It was Satan. The dragon is Satan. And he's also the beast that we see in Revelation. Verse 4, his tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. These are the angels that fell with Satan, that became the demons. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. What happened as soon as Jesus was born? Herod said, kill all the 2-year-old and under in Bethlehem. Satan's trying to wipe out the Messiah all through the Old Testament. Verse 5, she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Obvious reference to Jesus. And her child was caught up to God and his throne, which we know happened. Jesus died and was resurrected, went to be with God in heaven. Verse 6, then the woman, which we know is Israel, fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there for 1,260 days. So we're jumping in time here. This is Israel during the tribulation period. 1,260 days used in a 360-day year is exactly 3.5 years. This is the second half of the tribulation period. So Israel is fleeing to a place prepared for her. And God will protect her while the Antichrist is pursuing Israel, trying to kill Israel. Many believe that that place is Petra. I don't know that it is, but it's interesting. They do flee to the east. So, as with many other prophecies, Joseph's dream has a near and a far fulfillment. The near fulfillment is in Egypt, which, by the way, Egypt in the Bible always represents the world. Near fulfillment is Egypt. The far fulfillment is in the book of Revelation. Now moving on with the narrative. Verse 12. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So Jacob is in Hebron, but the brothers were tending the flock in Shechem, which is, you see Hebron on the bottom, circled in red? And Shechem is way up north. It's about 67 miles, or about a 6-day trip on foot. Remember, Jacob bought land up there. And so maybe he left some flocks up there. He sent the brothers up to tend those flocks that he left, or check on the northern ranch. It was also where Jacob was greatly influenced by the world. So he says, I'm going to send you up to that worldly place. All your brothers are up there. And Jacob responds, Here I am. And that's the response that said, Here I am, send me. An obedient response from a servant to his master. Verse 14, Then he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. Oh joy, how are the brothers going to receive this? He's not going up there to work with them. He's going up there to spy on them and come back and tell Dad how it's going. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Verse 15, Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? So he said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. He got to Shechem, and they're not there. He's wandering around. Verse 17, And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. So there's Shechem and Dothan north of it. It's at the head of the Jezreel Valley, very fertile place, about 17 miles north. Now when they, meaning the brothers, saw him, meaning Joseph, afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Man, they're going to kill their brother. Then they said to one another, Look, this dreamer is coming. So why were they upset? Because of those dreams. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, which would have been probably a dry cistern. And we shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. Now, do you think if Jacob or Joseph realized how much the hate was, that he would have sent him up there? Or Joseph would have said, Yeah, sure, I'll go. He might have hesitated a little bit. So apparently they didn't realize the degree of the hate. But from this paragraph, we see the root of the bitterness, and it was that message from God, the dream. Verse 21, But Reuben heard it, he's the oldest of the family, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So he's saying, let's not do the lynching, guys. Let's just throw him in the pit. Then he'll come back later and rescue him and get him back home to Dad. Good for Reuben. I mean, we know from Genesis 49 that it says Reuben was unstable as water because he slept with his father's concubine. But at least he's providing a little bit of leadership here. Don't kill him. Put him in the pit. I'll come back and get him. Verse 23, So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. So a dry cistern. So they joyfully strip him of that sign of authority and special favor by taking his tunic. No food, no water. Man, he's in a tough situation. And then they sat down to eat. What a good bunch of brothers. How heartless. They're totally conformed to the world. No compassion for Joseph. I mean, what was Joseph's biggest sin? He was being obedient to his dad. And then he tells them this message that God gave him, and they hate him for it. Isn't it true that the world hates us when they see that we're being obedient to God? If we'll just compromise with the world and do what the world says is right, we fit in. Everything's great. But when we stand for godly values and character, we begin to be attacked. The world hates that. The world would love to strip us of the robe of righteousness that Jesus has given us and toss each of us into a pit without water or food. If you think of it, Jesus was stripped of his robe and they cast lots for it. So you could say that Joseph is being a type, again, of Jesus here. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites. What's an Ishmaelite? Come on, you guys. It's a descendant of Ishmael. Yeah. Bunch of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. Gilead is circled there. That's the highlands in northern Israel. We'll drive through there on the tour. So they're coming down from Gilead. They're traders. They've gotten a bunch of products, and they're walking down to Egypt to sell them in Egypt. Now remember, Ishmael represents living a relationship with God through works. Hagar came through Abraham and Sarah's works. We need a son, we'll try to help God. Whereas Sarah and Isaac, he came by God's blessing, by God's grace. And so here we have the brothers living in the world, and here comes these guys that also are living by the world. And verse 26, so Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Hey, let's not kill him. We can make a little money. We'll just sell him off. Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened, meaning they agreed. Verse 28, we get a little more information here. Then Midianite traders passed by. So these Ishmaelites were from the region of Midian. So their brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. So Midian, well, where's that? Midian is down there by Mount Sinai. We read in Exodus chapter 2 that Moses fled to Midian, where he met Jethro, who is called the priest of Midian. So here's Mount Sinai, the real Mount Sinai down here. Here's all the Arab Peninsula, okay? And so the region of Midian is here. Now this is where all of Ishmael's descendants settled. So Jethro may have been a descendant of Ishmael. Interesting. 20 shekels of silver. You know, it's not that much money. In Exodus, if your bull gores a male or female slave, anybody have you had that lately? Your neighbor has a slave and your bull gores him, you got to pay him 30 pieces of silver. This is only 20. He's not even worth that of a slave, according to the brothers. You know someone else that was sold for 30 pieces of silver? Yeah, Jesus was. So again, is Joseph a type of Jesus? He was sold for just a few pieces of silver. And then they took Joseph to Egypt. In the Bible, Egypt represents the world, so Joseph went to the world as a lowly slave. When God's people came to him, later, Joseph saved them by feeding them. After being saved, God's people still had to dwell in the world for a time until the deliverer came. Anybody in here saved? Where are you dwelling? In the world. Until when? Till the deliverer comes. Later, 400 years later, God sent Moses to deliver his people from the world, and he led them through the water, representing baptism, to God's presence, at the mountain of God. And then they enter God's rest in the promised land. See all the symbology, it just goes on and on. I think it's probably accurate to say that Joseph is a type for us in representing Jesus and God's salvation of his people. Verse 29, then Reuben returned to the pit and went, Indeed, Joseph was not in the pit. We don't know where Reuben went, but he comes back, Joseph's gone. And he tore his clothes, and he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and where shall I go? What's he worried about? Oh, the lad is no more. What happened to him? Is he okay? No. Where shall I go? I don't want to get in trouble. He was sorrowful, but it wasn't the right kind of sorrow. We read in 2 Corinthians chapter 7 about two different types of sorrow. Godly sorrow produces repentance, which leads to salvation, not to be regretted. But the sorrow of the world produces death. I see no repentance here. He doesn't seem to have let's go get him back. He doesn't seem to have that repentant heart. He's only worried about facing Jacob for the crime. Verse 31, so they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? How cruel. How heartless. We don't care about your feelings, Dad. We're going to just tell you that your favorite was killed. Talk about self-centered. They were jazzed to get rid of Joseph. And he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. He's jumping to conclusions here, isn't he? Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. Now, this is the typical behavior to show mourning. We might wear black. There, they tear their clothes, and he wears sackcloth, which is itchy and uncomfortable. And he mourns for many days. And so the kids are going, we got to get past this. Verse 35, and all his sons and his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. I'm going to mourn him until I die. I was hoping he'd just kind of go, it was him, and move on. No, it really affected Dad. Now, verse 36, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. So Egypt had been a powerful and rich nation for 1,000 years before this time. They were educated. The pyramids were already old at this time. The Sphinx was already carved. Joseph arrives in Egypt, booming economy, as a slave to be sold. But we know Joseph's with him. We know God's with Joseph, And he's sold to a man of power and means. He doesn't stay there. Things kind of get worse. But that's where we're going to end today. And as I said earlier, Joseph is the focus of the rest of the book. So we're going to look at him quite a bit. And we're going to see his behavior through hard times and good times. He remains faithful to the Lord. It's a great example. For personal application, for me, I want to be purposeful in my heart. Plan to obey God before the temptation arises. Be determined. When we get surprised by something, and we can get surprised by many, many things, let's trust God no matter what and be ready to make that decision in whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, just like Joseph had to do. Do you think while he's sitting in that pit, he's going, gee, Lord, it's going to be interesting to see how you get me out of this one. Oh, I'm a slave in Egypt now. Oh, my. You said you'd be with me. Be interesting to see what you do. That was the heart of Joseph. And then lastly, I have Joseph was given a tunic. And we've been clothed, right? What have we been clothed with? Righteousness. And what does that new clothing represent? It's showing, it's an outward expression of our new character. We've been given Jesus' righteousness. From God's perspective, that's who we are. We're righteous in his eyes. Even though we know we continue to blow it, God forgives us. So let's remember, he's given us each a priceless tunic of one color, white. And let's try to live up to that garment.